Hey, Geoffrey, are you on?
Yep, here we go.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so it's actually recording.
Good to go.
Okay. So I did send an email with some of the questions. I just didn't get a chance to make all the slides.
No,
with,
that's
the
totally fine.
questions. So sorry about that. The cool thing is I want you guys to have enough time to be prepared, and in a way I don't take up too much of your time. I'm
It's
gonna
all
go ahead
good.
and
Here, I'm gonna pull them up for you.
I'm gonna go ahead and introduce you.
Great.
So this is Geoffrey Harpster. So Geoffrey Harpster is an 11-year infantry vet, and he's also a doctoral student. He's currently an H2F strength and conditioning coach. So with the 44th Medical Brigade out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Geoffrey holds an associate's degree in accounting, his bachelor's, and his master's is in exercise science and human performance. So he is currently a full-time student in addition to working with the H2F team. The school he's currently at is Concordia University in Chicago. So his foremost education, he also holds CSCS, FMS, and CPT. CPT is with the NSCA too?
No, it was with the National Academy of Strength and Medicine.
NASM. Okay, got it. Okay, sorry, I skipped over that one because I didn't see. Okay, so he specializes in tactical performance. So injury prevention strategies, load carriage is currently what he's working on for his research. And then there's a number of data analysis projects he's performed. So his previous experience has to do with multiple combat tours, so both to Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as a military and defense contractor. So he also has worked with protective security teams and then Fortune 500 companies and celebrities. So over the past 5 years, he's been performing strength and conditioning operations with the tactical personnel as well. So Jeremy, some of the stuff that I want to go over, my name is Captain Ramel Walkai. You can go by Mel, it's perfectly fine. I just use that captain just because sometimes we don't know I'm in the military, that's all. So as you can see the clothes I'm in.
Yeah.
I was laughing, we were like, he's actually in. So I'm a part of Injury Prevention Division for USARIUM. So this does tie into the research that I do with USARIUM. However, for the class side, this research has to go with the tactical strength conditioning aspect of combat medics and as well as 18 deltas. You have the expertise in that, so that's why we're asking you some of these questions and then what you've already performed throughout the last 5 years, really, with these guys.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide. At least I have one question that's on this slide.
No, it's all good.
All right, so give me an idea of what your team consists of.
So through my Army position, so I work for H2F, as you mentioned. So I'm a strength and conditioning coach for a normal non-combat brigade combat team. So 44th Medical Brigade's the Army's largest, and I think it's the only, if I'm not mistaken, it's the only detached medical brigade that's multidisciplinary. So we have guys deployed all the time to every country that we have people in, and you name it. So they support everyone from sometimes JSOC all the way down. Could be COVID relief to forward surgical teams doing airborne operations. It really pretty drastic. And then anyway, so as far as my team goes, so there are several strength coaches that are assigned to our location at 44th Med at Fort Bragg. So since we have several outstations, we have some at Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. We have some at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and then we have some at Fort Stewart, Georgia. So we're kind of split. We're unlike a lot of the other H2F teams that are very centric, or like the infantry BCTs, kind of like what I grew up in, where everything is all in one spot. That's not the case with this brigade. So we have strength coaches. So we have, if you're not familiar with H2F, and I'll kind of super wave top that, wave tops. But anyway, so essentially for our the way H2F works is we have a strength and conditioning pillar, which is strength coaches at the bottom, all the way up to our head strength coach, and we report to our program director. Under that, we also have injury prevention team, which is several physical therapists, athletic trainers, and then we also have like green suiters who are also physical therapy techs, I think is their MOS. That's their job in the
Those are enlisted NCO group, right?
Yeah, correct. So we have a couple of them, our physical therapists, our registered dietitians, we have nutritionists, as well as full-scale dietitian. They're all green suiters, so they're all either enlisted or officer, depending on the position. So that's kind of makes up what an H2F team is, and we have like behavioral health, and we're just still slowly getting like our cognitive performance people in. But we kind of work, and I'll say the fun term, holistically together to kind of do what collegiate strength and conditioning has been doing forever. Having like a multidisciplinary team to have somebody on site, point of injury, point of impact, whatever happens, we can immediately triage. We can, obviously like musculoskeletal injuries and that kind of thing. We're not doing like surgical repair, healing anybody on the spot. But essentially, we can provide a lot of direction and stretching, and we have a bunch of different therapies from dry needling to manual manipulation, whatever.
Okay. I'm just going to go back a slide this way they have that visual.
Yeah.
So my question too was back to what you discussed about behavioral health. That team is consistent of what, 2 personnel? Like you have a psychologist, right?
So we don't have a full-scale psychologist right now. We worked out with, since we support a medical brigade, we have a lot of the MOSs that would normally fit into an H2F team on the green suiter side. So all military personnel. So we have a captain kind of pseudo filling in till we get our transfer in, who's going to take control over. I think she's an occupational therapist. And they have occupational therapy kind of covering down on that pillar in H2F. So they kind of do a dual role of occupational therapy as well as referring up for higher behavioral health care. So currently we do have a behavioral psychologist just out of the exchange that we have going on right now.
Okay. And then just to touch with the audience, Geoffrey and I spoke previous to this, and some of the things we're trying not to do is talk about our stresses with the military and the personnel.
Right.
But we're limited in what we can do. That's the only reason I asked you a question about the one person. I was like, is it that person there? Right.
Yeah. So we're kind of in transition right now. We the previous person who was in that position just retired. So.
And then one other question too, before I get into some of the things about training, is what is the number of personnel you guys are training? And let's say, is it 1 to 50 for a strength coach? Because we're talking large scale numbers that most people are not hearing. H2F is dealing with entire brigades, right? So they're not knowing the numbers of what the brigade is.
Correct. So we have, since we are a very sectioned off brigade, we have people again at Fort Campbell. So we have several hundred soldiers that we support there. We have several hundred that we support at Fort Stewart. We have there's only very few that are kind of outstationed to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and we provide like telehealth services. We don't have any personnel on the ground. But collectively, our brigade is responsible for just under 2,000 soldiers. And that ranges from veterinary techs all the way to airborne surgeons and you name it. So it's a pretty wide breadth of it, all the way to we have combat medics, and we have units that support a lot of the 82nd units when they do forward deployments and that kind of thing. So it really depends, but right around 2,000 as far as soldiers that we support. Okay.
That's just to give insight on the extent of the stress that the H2F team would be dealing with by personnel. So one of the things that I want to get into with the training is, what is a typical day like for you as an H2F strength coach?
Okay, that's a fun one. So depending on who you ask, every brigade runs their H2F team very differently. So the utilization for H2F teams isn't the same across the board, although we wish it was. We're super lucky in that we have a great relationship with all of our commanders, all of our enlisted staff. So we have full access to run and coach as much as we want, whether that's running platoon PT in the morning to full scale command PT and like full battalion competitions. Like we literally have full access to do whatever we want, which is really nice. Now, not every company is the same. Some commanders and first sergeants and the old types typically are very, I don't want to say controlling because it's not the right term. They're responsible for their own soldiers. So I understand that. I've been on that side. Having been an instructor and all the things, like I completely understand wanting to take physical control and command control of what's happening to your soldiers physically in order to meet the metrics that you are required to do and meet professionally. So like, I totally get that. So it's very complicated, but we're very fortunate for our brigade, thankfully. I've heard horror stories across some of the other H2F teams as far as not being utilized and that kind of thing.
Okay, that makes sense.
But I think your question originally was a day in the life, but very simply is it starts very early. You know, PT is typically first formations at 6:30, depending on the unit. But typically at 6:30 is when Reveille is played across base. So that's typically first formation time. Everything usually culminates or kind of begins right after that. So from about 6 till about 8 is solid PT time. And that's like pretty universal for most H2F teams. So we have some people that start at 6, some people that start at 7. That way we can kind of support longer operations throughout the day because we are contractually limited to 8 hours per day.
And it's also showing too, they're not necessarily limited just to the morning PT, right? So they can go in the evening and stuff like that.
Correct.
Okay.
And then so our H2F team, we do a lot of like one-on-one appointments. So we do a lot of individual programs, people training for selections, people training for, badges or schools or, what have you. So we do a lot of that. And then we do a lot of like, before we got the rest of our H2F team, and this is just kind of shows H2F as a very weird place. We didn't have any of our athletic trainers on staff. So it was just us. I mean just the strength coaches. We showed up kind of first, and we ended up supporting and doing everything from rehabilitation. So, everything that an AT does. So ankles, knees, that kind of thing. All the way through, like complete. If our physical therapists were backed up, like we were assistant physical therapists as well as strength coaches, as well as, almost salesmen, and then trying to like convince these commanders that we are a viable asset to their command. So there's just a lot that goes into this entrepreneurial spirit of being a H2F personnel, if you will.
I like the way you put that, because you guys do wear multiple hats and have to do it. Right?
Yeah.
So
at this point, I've now created a trainer course. We've got an online library. It's crazy.
Yes, I actually haven't seen that library at all, but I've been hearing about all the stuff that you guys have been creating behind the scenes, and we're all like just blown away with so much of the stuff.
Oh, we appreciate that.
So with that being said, give me an idea about some of the physical requirements, because we'll shift to simply the combat medics, and
Sure.
then we'll then talk about the special operations combat medics of the 18 deltas. So give me an idea of what do you feel are some of the limitations when you're training combat medics. What are some of the common injuries, if you want to give me some of that?
So with any load carriage, you're going to have a lot of like physical stress. So like when you carry external loads to the body, it's going to cause stress. So where that stress manifests depends on how well the chassis is built. So for most, it depends on the generation, right? So previous generation, we would see a lot of the more common injuries of like knees and hips and that kind of thing. And And now we're seeing a lot more like acute injuries, more like stress fractures, or a lot more like preventable injuries versus like, oh, I fell and twisted my leg. And now I have this other thing that I ignored for 6 months and now is a bigger problem. Now we see more like acute or like undertrained related injuries with some of the younger soldiers. And a lot of it's most, especially with combat medics, a lot of it's just going to be the excess gear that they have to carry. So, training up for like the EFMB, for example, so the Expert Field Medical Badge, there's a lot of training that goes into that in terms of the amount of volume that they're doing, the amount of events that they have to perform well as the amount of just external load that they have to carry. So every time you get down, that's another rep that it causes you to stand. So people forget that those are repetitions that matter. So people get very overtrained very quickly. So a lot of it's lower backs, hips, knees, and then with the younger generation, a lot more like the preventable stress-related injuries.
Okay. And so, because you mentioned EFMB, which is the Expert Field Medical Badge, do you have a lot of personnel that are pursuing it and seek you out to improve their, let's say, ACFT scores or overall cardiovascular state just to sustain through? Because I know it's a
We do, yeah. So we have quite a, and then we also run like our brigade also runs Best Medic for the entire
competition,
all of Fort Bragg. So we not only run it, but we also very competitive in it. So while we didn't take first place or anything this year or this previous EFMB in all of our Best Medics, but we are very, very into that. So we send a lot of soldiers to not only support the events themselves, so people who are already qualified and help judge those events, but then help train the people that are doing the events, and then people that are going to the events. We have high expectations that people achieve those as well. Okay. So yeah, we do have quite a bit.
Okay. And if you're not familiar with the Best Medic competition, those are competitions based on soldiering skills of a medic to establish, just top quality soldiers who display a certain badge, but also display something for the Corps, so which is the Medical Service Corps. So for your coordinated efforts with the team, what type of assessments do you all use? Let's say you can tell me about function movement screen, you can tell me about SFMA, any of those.
So it really depends on the population. So if I have a soldier that comes to me and it is already combat medic qualified, the whole nine, and is pursuing one thing or the other. Let's say they're pursuing a special missions unit and trying out for some really high level medical teams. Okay. Which would be like special forces level. We send some guys to like very top level guys to Whiskey One, which is like another medical course. So then they become qualified to perform special forces level medical stuff when they're not special forces themselves. So for
that's before the SOCOM course, right?
Yeah. The Whiskey One, they get like a Whiskey One identifier on their MOS. Okay. So that's kind of how that goes. We train a lot of guys for those kind of things. I think I missed your question. What was the?
That was correct. Okay. SMF. So because I already know you're certified in FMS. However, sometimes they're not hearing the actual assessments you all are utilizing.
So we don't actually use the FMS a lot, which kind of bumps me out. I'm certified, but so when you're dealing with large amounts of like the volume of athletes that we have, there becomes a problem when you get too granular in some of the details. If they need it, or if you see you can identify a problem or a poor movement pattern, absolutely. That's when you can pull that person aside and be like, yo, here's the deal. We are going to do X, Y, and Z because you show limitations or some sort of dysfunction in this area. So we're going to address that. Then we will move on with training. So I think it just depends on who the person is, what they are specifically seeing me for, because I wear so many hats, training private athletes and, top tier special forces guys to training regular non-special forces combat medics. Such a broad spectrum, but each one have their own specific thing. And it may be the same level of issue at the high level versus the low level, but each person, you can't approach those problems the same, because the training age of somebody who's been on like an ODA for 10 years and then has 5 years of like regular infantry time or regular army time before that, that's a lot of wear and tear on a body. Mm-hmm. So you have to treat that person very differently versus, treating somebody who has been in the service for, let's say, 2 years and doesn't have all that wear and tear and didn't play high level sports before, but are in fairly good shape. They're going to have different problems. So I think just treating everybody where they're at is the name of the game.
Yeah. And that's true. The same way with the Tom Brady aspect versus the brand new rookie or even the collegiate athlete.
Correct. So, yeah.
When you look at like the wear and tear, do you guys recommend soft tissue modalities to be implemented for a torn body? Because we have in the military a lot, right? So
yeah. So I think again, it just depends on the person. Sometimes not when you're as a prior infantry guy, everything looks like a nail, right? So as a hammer, everything is getting hammered, right? But in rehabilitation or physical therapy or exercise science, like you can't apply that same, let's say, violence of action to everything. You just can't do it. So I think sometimes that's the answer. Yes. Foam roll, trigger point, myofascial release, whether we're doing like Theraguns, or it could be some flossing techniques, or it could be, I think you mentioned it earlier, but like nerve entrapment stuff where we're like doing manual manipulations to like free up nerve bundles or whatever those issues are. Yeah. Some people need dry needling. Some people need a foam roller,
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah,
we use that a lot. All of those soft tissue stuff, way more than I've previously used them, because so many people just neglect either mobility, flexibility, probably both, and any sort of self-care. And so we try to like reframe every soldier that we talk to that you're an athlete. You need to think like an athlete. And the difference is then you start to look at yourself and treat yourself like a professional. Mm-hmm. I eat this because I need to eat this, not because I want to eat this. I need to do soft tissue work because I need to feel good for my workout tomorrow so I can get to my goals of being this fast or this strong or being able to complete this evolution with no pain or whatever the issue is. There's a lot that goes into that, but I think helping people kind of reframe that is really where it starts.
Okay, see, that's what I like about that. And then, so this was the same question on injury prevention strategies.
Okay.
Do you guys use an injury incidents report that needs to, let's say, go speak to the commanders or transfer up? Now, we know there's a report for Army prevention analysis, but we're just trying to see if you guys are actually utilizing any injury prevention report, because you guys have a team that's very knowledgeable, that's firsthand, like with those personnel versus going back to a team where the commander may not know about any of those.
Right. And that's a very good question. But so I think that's a two-part answer. And the first part is, I'll give you the easy answer, is yes. We do have a form that we use. We do, if it's as a strength coach, we don't have access to like Genesis or any of the profile sites or any of that kind of stuff. Like we're civilian contractors. We don't have access to a lot of the medical files or things that we would need to be able to put those notes in. So that goes directly to our athletic trainers and they handle that. Everything gets logged in what I think it was formerly Ultra, right? And then now it's Genesis. Yeah. Whatever the system is, it does get logged. So if I'm helping you, it usually doesn't. It means you're not serious enough to need something logged in your medical file. If it is, we immediately pass that. We have a great immediate handshake. We all work in a very communal office, so we're like, okay, cool. You take this person, you take this person, and yeah, we kind of roll with that. And then the second part of that answer is no, because not everything needs to be put in. And we have a lot of people that we see, especially the older or more serious soldiers that are trying to make this a profession. They don't want that stuff on their records. So it's not necessarily a game of hiding things. It's more a game of, how do I talk to the soldier to let them know what they're talking about is very serious or it's not? And how can I help them navigate this system to the best, not of my ability, but to like whatever they're trying to accomplish. So kind of giving them advice on like, hey, this is a pretty serious issue and this is going to be chronic. So if it's a bigger issue, it'll already be handed off from an AT or to an AT to kind of take that from there, or elevate it to like our physical therapists or provider if need be. We have referred up to both behavioral health and surgeons and orthopedic surgeons, you name it. We've had all that stuff already. It's been a very busy 6 months.
The only reason I asked that one is just the question on that one is just because, so with the 70 Hotel or 70 Bravo personnel, that's the system that they're supposed to be able to operate.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to talk to them about what they're putting in information is, how they're logging in MedChart, mainframe, any of those systems, and then transferring information to see. But it doesn't, for us, we don't need to see it consistently because they have to have like an LOD and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's how like over the 10-year span, the government is looking at the improvement rate of H2F. So when they say like, our injury rates going down, that's what we say, our injury rates are going down due to XYZ training, which we know is through strength training and stuff like that. Right. Or if it's to the integration of the ATCs, the PTs, all that stuff, to pinpoint them. But and
I don't know that you're going to be able to. And here's the problem why. It would be like a huge undertaking. And it's because it's not always black and white where you can be like, oh, there's the answer. This is the issue. But because I think from a strength coach perspective, we completely have changed across this brigade how the brigade trains. They now are on a regimented, progressive program that is built and designed to keep everybody from getting injured. So inherently, we've seen massive reductions in injuries. And I don't have the statistics for you, but because we track all of our stuff through a system that our physical therapist is a genius. He created this tracking system called Raptor. And I think he's doing some big stuff for the Army on that front. But essentially, that's how we track all of our stuff internally. And we've been able to measure that there's been a massive reduction in injury since strength coaches have arrived, just merely because one of the biggest predictors of injury across our brigade was working out without a strength coach. Was definitely one of their more serious, things.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm glad to hear. So the other thing is like the devices. I know you're hearing a lot about devices, stride devices, all those HRV. Let's give the audience an idea of what devices you do not use. So when someone comes to you and says, hey, can we use HRV? Can we use whoop watches? Which because we know half the staff these things. They're like, well, in the funds we can't afford half of that stuff. So what are you talking about?
Right.
So what devices do you even advise them to utilize?
So, and again, I think it depends on the training age and the seriousness of the athlete. So if they are, let's say I have an athlete, great example. I have a guy who he's one of my more advanced medics, and he runs like ultras on the side. So he's very serious in that realm, but he's not serious enough to where he trains appropriately for that kind of thing. So like what we did is I advised him that he needs to get a 1 second here. All right. Sorry about that. But
No
anyway,
problem.
with his thing, we advised him to get a heart rate strap. So in a watch, he already had obviously that like track pace and that kind of thing. But then we could look at his heart rate variability, and not variability, I'm sorry, his target heart rate zones to monitor and track his progress and fine tune his training, because he wasn't getting enough like low zone aerobic work in. So his like VO2 max was lower than it should have been for how much he runs. So we tailored that. Boom, he got faster and, was able to like run a little further and all the things. So stuff like that, it depends. There's nothing that we widespread recommend. There isn't one thing that we're like, this is the thing. If you really just need anything in terms of wearables, like a good watch that tracks pace and gives you pace feedback on the spot. And then if you want to take it a step further, like heart rate's the next thing. And right now, like some watches are good, some watches are not, some straps are this or that. It's all subjective. You know what I mean? Like they're all good to a certain point. And I don't know, and it could just be me. It's totally a personal opinion. I just don't think unless you're going to use the data, don't even bother. Like, don't get yourself any one thing or the other. And I'm not going to name drop, wearables or whatever, but there's no point. If you're not going to utilize the data, don't track it. Because then it's the first thing that you stress about when you run. You're like, oh, my pace is this. Well, if you're not doing anything with your pace data or tracking yourself over time, why does it matter?
Yeah, that's pretty fine. I'm gonna slide past that one just because of government contracts.
Right. Just won't mention any, and we'll be good.
Yeah. Just because some of those contracts, they're trying to get all their money from the military. Just put this on them. And you're like,
yeah,
man, if they heard you, they'd be like, wait a minute, they don't. Because you guys are firsthand, right? That's who they technically should be.
Oh man,
things with.
And the crazy thing is, as a strength coach, like we can't make those decisions. Like I'm a civilian contractor. I don't even have access to like profile systems, let alone purchasing funds. Like,
yeah, it's like going to these GA financial meetings and like they just blow money constantly on things. I'm like, you gotta ask these guys, these devices that I'm wearing. So when you look at periodization, so let's go into the 18 Delta crew.
Okay.
So for our special operations medics, do you guys have periodization plans that are like randomized for each athlete, or do you guys set up something where you say, hey, this is the periodized plan based on if you're going to be here or if you're going to leave, this is what you're going to utilize? You all set something up like that?
So and again, I'll just kind of throw a disclaimer out. So I don't work for Thor. So my direct work population is not that population. However, so my private company, so I work for another athletic company that's right here around Fort Bragg, and 90% of our athletes are 18 series, special forces guys or above typically. And I train all their tactical guys that are deployed and that kind of thing, or going to other bigger selections such as like special missions units and that kind of thing. So training those guys is a whole nother animal. The level of commitment and the level of volume that they're able to accomplish is astounding. And so you may write them a program and they're like, nah, man, I then went and did Murph twice and I ran 5 miles. Oh, and then I went and did yoga with my girlfriend. And then you're like, bro, like you're going to overtrain. Like, how are you even functioning? And then he gets up and benches 600 pounds or, squats 600 pounds the next day. You're like,
oh yeah, so true.
Yes, I'll shut my mouth over here. So it's a learning curve to get behind each individual person, because not everybody goes into special operations at the same level. So you may have somebody who starts out in special operations and has no formal background, but they've got the intestinal fortitude and all the other qualities that they look for. So they may make that selection, but they may be wildly physically inadequate compared to, your Pat Tillmans or your guys who come off the college line and are running, you know, crazy 40 times and have a 5-minute mile, like, you know, like, and they're still like 200 plus, like that's a lot of person running and being able to do those things. So periodization is a very fun topic with that community, because there is no off season. So you can't treat them like a 4-season athlete. You can't. It's not like soccer where you have a legit in season, you have a postseason, you have, you know, preseason, and then you have in season. So like you don't have that kind of thing in military or tactical athletes. And tactical is a very broad term, you know, maybe used a little too loosely these days. But in terms of like periodization for these people, it depends on their job and what they are specifically trying to do as an 18 Delta or as, you know, a Ranger medic or any of those, you know, super high speed jobs, all very important jobs, but they're all very different. And so like the unit that you're going to, what are the demands? Is there a water component? Do you need to be able to swim with your stuff? Like what are the physical components or the physical attributes that will set you up for success in, let's say, a mission? You could have an 18 Delta who's on a free fall team and decides that he wants to go to dive school. Okay, well, all right, man, like you better get in the pool. So like we're going to completely throw out a lot of the other training that he was doing and focus laser hard on that, you know. It just really depends. And I hate giving that answer because like it's such an ambiguous, like garbage answer, but it's so true.
It's so sad. I'm so used to that now that I'm like, because you can meet, you know, a sergeant major or somebody who is older would tell you, well, I did this, I did that. I'm like, I can agree. His bio says it. And sometimes people are not used to that, right? When we hear the single team, we're like, you play with that team. Like, no, some of these guys play with a team forever.
Right.
Like, he hasn't left that position. So we're dealing with somebody that maybe just that in that occupational specialty for 2 years. Or less than that because they got booted off the team, which you know, sometimes these guys, 75th Ranger bat, leave it because they're burnt out and they're like, I'm exhausted, I'm going somewhere else. That's why I say, don't trust me. I'm hearing everything because I'm going, I understand sometimes when I speak about psychological stress of the guys, I'm going, I understand if you don't want to do something for that long and you're tired of, well, you know, whatever, you got a guy to deploy 10 times.
Have you ever seen, there was like a cartoon where like they were driving down the street and essentially everyone was just trying to keep all the parts from falling off. Yeah. Like that's how I describe a lot of these guys. And like, you can only do that for so long. You've got to auto regulate. If you don't feel like training that day and you are listening to your body and in tune with what you should be doing, you're probably going to lay off the gas that day. Yeah. And if you don't, over time, it could lead to like overuse injuries or like compound injuries or mechanical problems, you know, like whatever the issue is, you're going to have problems if you're continuously like, you know, putting round pegs in square holes. Like it's just.
Yeah, because you know about our culture with the hard charging and
especially this entire population is notorious for hiding or like concealing things and being like, I'm the toughest dude on the team, which is awesome. And we want that. But how do we foster this, or how do we change the culture enough to where you come see me before it's a problem, or the moment you're like, man, I just tweaked my back today. Could you like help me with like loosen this up? Done, man. Let's get to it. And then it's not a problem the next day when you wake up weird because you only slept 5 hours because you were doing night ranges or whatever the issue is. Like, and then you go, but you have powerlifting tomorrow because that's not coming off the schedule because it's a team event. You're going to do it. Like, okay, good luck, you know. And over time, that's why everyone who does 20 years or even 10, like I only did 11 and I feel like I'm 50.
Yeah, but you don't.
Yeah, but it's the same mentality where you push and push and push. And when's off switch? There is no off season. So if you're not planning for it consistently, you're going to overtrain. It's just a matter of time before your knees go out, or you herniate a disc or whatever. I herniated 2 discs on a fast rope. And it was like, they're like, cool, you're going back to work tomorrow though, right?
Oh. I remember working at, you remember it used to be called Athletes Performance back in the day, and it's now Exos. So I worked in Pensacola, and we had a guy, he was a Marine, and he was with the special operations team and told us he had fell off a building. And he was like, I'm just trying to get back with my guys. And we're like, what's the recovery time? And he's sitting there going, I'm gonna push through. And I'm like, dude, don't worry, we're not gonna pass you on this test just because you're gonna, need to get back with your team. We want to make sure you're well, right? Not like, oh, just get back with the guys. So that's the behavior that we know. And I'll go, I remember the guys at Exos always telling us, yeah, you military guys. And that was the day, I mean, literally, I was like, wait a minute, are you looking at me like that? I was like, I'm the one that's trying to learn this stuff.
No, that's how it goes though, man. Like, if you're not on top of these guys, like, they will just push themselves to the point of no return. And like, that's all cool, just as long as you're ready for that. Like, just know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and it could be a train or it could be salvation. Like, you don't know. And what you do along the way will set you up one way or the other.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. That's all like that. And then my last question was about, this is the biggest thing about sleep cycles. There's so much on sleep research. So with that being said, because this is the last question, give me an idea of how you guys attack the sleep issue. For me personally, you've been in the military long enough that you can realize our training operations, our missions, our planning, sleep cycles are not put in there. And you can see my face with the type of bags, right? Every time I meet somebody, I go, tell me about your sleep cycles.
Right now, that's the whole thing.
Man.
So in terms of helping soldiers sleep, I don't know that there's like a quick fix. So my program director, he had some luck years ago with the Oura Ring, or one of them, because it gave them a sleep score. And the dudes that he was kind of working with made it a competition between themselves to kind of, I don't know if you heard the recent like Mops and Mo's, but like Drew is my program director.
Oh.
So he was kind of talking about that. So that was like one of the things where it's like, okay, like,
yeah, that's the YouTube, and they got a podcast.
Yeah. So I hear it all. But when you really think about it, though, like, he's not wrong. Like, how do we attack the psychology of wanting to sleep? Not look at it as some sort of crutch. Whereas like the Army I grew up in, I joined in 2006. So like, off deployments, like, it was like, you do not sleep. Like, it's just not a thing.
Yeah. And
sleep is a crutch, and the whole Army infantry like adage of that. But when in reality, like, I hear it more now than I ever did when I was in. People talk and care about sleep. And so like my more serious athletes, and again, kind of reframing that mindset behind, you are an athlete. You have a physical requirement for your profession, period. So you're a tactical athlete, and you just happen to do tactical things to also make you a tactical athlete. But in terms of like your ability to perform continuously for 20 years, like, what's the longevity of like a sport athlete? A couple years post-college, maybe. Whereas like, we're asking people to do this well into their 40s, especially these like higher end, SOCOM special operations guys. They don't want to leave because like at that point you make, one, good money, and two, like, you're kind of setting a career path. Like, so if we are not like approaching things from a very smart perspective, we can quickly get left behind. Yeah. And I think, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. That was a major point that I want them to get, is just to hear from your voice about the change in direction we're starting to go, and how we're starting to see some soldiers are really discussing these things. Because before, like you said, we came in 2006, basic training for me was as they say, 8 hours, but you got fire guard, right? And you got all these other things going on.
Yeah,
You got all these things going on, and you're getting up prepared for the next day for training. And I'm thinking,
right.
ooh, nobody asked us about anything about sleep, right? So nowadays we're hearing, I mean, literally generals discussing these with enlisted soldiers to say, hey, specialist, come over and talk to me about something.
Right.
And he's like, how much sleep did you get? Yeah. And I'm just thrown off because I would love to record some of these guys to go, and as a one-star just asked him about his sleep.
Yeah. So very weird story. Yesterday, General Menes, he came out. And one of the first questions he asked a lower enlisted soldier was, how much did you guys sleep tonight? Or how much did you guys sleep last night? Are you guys ready to do this workout? And I was like, hey, man, now we're talking. We're on the right track.
That's a major component that I've looked at so much to ask these guys. So I am trying. I always tell people, like, I see you guys are trying to, in that culture, we're shifting in a positive direction. But I know you've seen it since the beginning of a time like 2006, where you now see the transition. And that's where a lot of these guys, I tell them behind the scenes, we're all observing, we're seeing this. I talked to a guy today who had been out for a couple of years, and he couldn't believe, he said, what's an H2F? And I put on the video, and he was like, no, that's not right. They're getting all that. And I go, you'd be surprised, man.
It's crazy. And that's program is pretty cool. There's a lot of really good things that are happening in the Army. And I think on the special operations side, we have Thor, and, we have some other stuff for the special mission guys. But then we have, H2F, which is taking up the rollout will be the rest of the Army. So like, we're changing the culture, whether we want to or not. It's already changing. Yeah. We are no longer just driving people till they die. Like we have a lot of very seasoned professionals and some that need some seasoning, but like we have a lot of people that really care, and we don't want the consistent like overuse injuries, or we will do this many like whatever stupid things that the Army normally does for workouts per week, or like rucking 6 times, or immediately jumping into a 12-mile when you have undertrained people, or rehab or whatever. There's so many things, and we're just slowly changing it. And I really appreciate that the Army is finally on the right track.
Yeah. Because you know about Lieutenant Colonel Behringer and Fort Sam and all that stuff. So we always tell everybody, because a lot of us know each other in these fields, that the medical community is the first to add bipods, DEXAs, and all these devices that you go to a medical unit, and you're like, well, you guys can test that way. Yeah, and we have all these contractors working, and you're like, well, you can go take your unit there. So when I talk to chemical units or signal, I usually incite that for them and say, if you make a trip out of it, and like you can literally get them all tested, you'd be surprised. Some of those guys want to see some of that stuff for the first time and really meet you all. So I always say, like, what they're doing down, because I'm in Texas, so what they're doing down at Fort Sam and everything, and trying to get these educational things out. So I'm actually going to put this one on YouTube too as well, just so more people hear your name. They get to reach out to you, especially students, right? Because we don't know who is going to hear our voice, because sadly say, man, we're getting older. When you said 2006, I was like, man,
I was in 2006, and woo.
Yeah, we hear a lot of guys coming in, and we're like, oh man, how long you been in? They're like, oh, 2 years. You're like, oh God. All right. So nowadays I see a lot of full birds and everybody, they're saying, I'll be out in 2. So take it over. And we're going, oh God. Yeah. I'm just like trying to connect with every one of you guys to say, my group at USAREAM is like, are you reaching out to these guys? I'm trying. So that we can put a face to a name and then say, contact this guy. I actually heard that podcast. So I was happy that they started something. Yeah. So more people are seeing that, and TSAC is taking ahead of this and everything. So with that being said, man, I'm very thankful for your time. And Absolutely. I really appreciate everything you're doing, and you are heading in the right direction for us. Even if you decide to go to the pro team, because you guys usually get
my entire dissertation is on tactical athletes. Like, you're gonna have to take a wrecking ball to get me out of here. Like, so, probably shift more towards the data analysis in the future. Potentially doing some stuff with SOCOM in the future. So we'll see kind of what pans out here and there. But
So did you want to tell them some of the stuff you're heading on research? I think Dr. Abel might want to hear this, but you can go ahead and tell about your research.
Sure, yeah. As far as like my dissertation?
Give them, not your full title and everything, because just more so about the direction you're heading with load carriage.
Yeah, so dissertation right now is focused on load carriage and load bearing physical assessments that assess occupational task performance. So there's a huge gap right now and no one wants to talk about this. This is the unpopular subject. No one wants another PT test. No one wants to even say the word PT test. So, or phrase PT test. So in on that disclaimer, it isn't about another PT test. We look at the ACFT and we want so many things from it. We promote from it. We use it to assess performance. We use it to assess job placement. We use it to assess everything that the Army has. And so since so many things are intertwined with, the Army's just model behind physical performance, and it's just so, integral in like the entire, what is a soldier? You think of somebody who is physically fit and is able to do things and, travel over terrain and carry things and whatever. So we don't want to get away from that. And so, but are we doing the Army a service by not properly assessing their ability to perform occupational related tasks? So there was this really interesting study that I found, and without giving you the long version of all of my research, essentially just but inherently, since I am FMS qualified, or certified, or whatever, I kind of I found this article on the functional movement screen. And this essentially, this guy or these group of researchers, they assessed police officers with their gear and without. And what they found was a lot of police officers were fine. They were very, they passed the FMS according to the FMS standards. But what they found was really interesting is they did not pass some of them did not pass. And it highlighted when they loaded their gear on and performed the same movements. Mm-hmm. They essentially had way worse scores. And the people who had way worse scores, upon different testing, they found greater asymmetries and all these other problems. So essentially, when we look at just merely on a basis of you move differently when you are wearing gear versus when you are not. Right. You cannot lay down the same. You cannot stand up the same. If you have a 40-pound ruck on and a 35-pound vest plus a 17-pound weapon plus everything else, that's a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. You're not going to move the same. And if we're not looking at that objectively, and we're being okay, how can we assess occupational task performance or how do we do that loaded? Because that would give us the greatest predictor of occupational performance, because we're replicating that just in a safe, sterile environment. And so with an ACFT, when have you ever deadlifted anything on target? I've been on 6 combat deployments, and not once did I have to deadlift anything over 200 pounds. Well, I had some heavy guys on my team. But so aside from that, I'm not doing max effort deadlifts. I'm not doing a straight up 2-mile run, although the measures that are there are very important. Mm-hmm. And my point is that we need the Army started to do this years ago. They looked at the APFT and they're okay, we get it. There's some shortcomings. There was a loaded test that came out, and I don't remember where it was called or where it went, but the Army never used it. But essentially, it was a loaded, kind of like the RPAT. The Ranger Physical Assessment Test is a loaded test. They do it to replicate combat environments. They're doing it in uniform with boots and a vest and a helmet. That's it. So what they do is they do all of these very soldiery tasks. They're climbing ropes, they're descending ropes and ladders, they're traversing walls, they're carrying things, they're dragging a sled of 186 pounds, not 90, like the ACFT. So they're doing things that are very replicated in combat scenarios. And then there's like a mile run at the end. So you do all of these things, but you're doing them loaded. And that's kind of the point. Why are we not looking at how soldiers move loaded?
Loaded, yeah. And we discussed that earlier. So that's why I really wanted you to bring that up, because right now we're covering load carriage in court in the course.
Yeah.
So it's pretty insightful just to hear about, the military testing strategies are limited in terms of how we're not loading soldiers. So I totally agree, because
and maybe there isn't room for another test, but it's something to think about in terms of how we program, how we treat these athletes, and what we prioritize. Like, are we prioritizing load carriage? Because as we know, load carriage is really hard on the human body. And so you have to build that resistance and that resilience to be able to perform load carriage over time, especially for the length of a career. Yeah. So there's going to be times where you're doing lighter loads at faster paces, or lighter loads at slower paces, or heavier loads, and vice versa, and all those things. But they have to be kind of ebb and flow and match the tempo of the training, match the tempo of the operational requirements, everything. The soldier's life, their personal life, their financial situation will matter, because if they're financially stressed, they're not going to perform well in the gym. They're not going to perform well on physical tasks. Like, we know these things. If they're not sleeping well, if they're not, if something is, a cog in the wheel is off, it'll show itself.
Yeah, and that research still brings insight even more to how we need to train with the load carriage, even if they don't consider it as a test, which ideally Special Operations Command and everybody else does consider that a part of the
Absolutely.
test.
They look at that.
But the general soldier is kind of like, I don't know why we haven't seen this. You got girls that are 90 to 100 and something pounds that are able to carry 60 plus pounds, but we're not going, that's a 300 on the PT. Without even considering a test, right? And I'm gonna roll marches and I'm like, she's 5'2", man. Like, pound for pound, she's stronger than me.
Right.
And nobody's taking consideration of it, but me, I'm going.
That's the hard part, is relative strength doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does, but in terms of, like, let's say, for example, we have a soldier who gets shot. We are trying to evacuate this soldier. His weight does not change based on who's picking him up.
Correct. Yeah.
That's where, like, the gender neutral standards kind of, I don't understand why we kind of derailed that train. But I think overall, like, we should look at things from a very wide view perspective. We look at each soldier, we look at each unit, we look at each training evolution, each whatever we're trying to do, and just open our aperture, take in as much information as we can, and then get laser focused on improving a few things. We get those, we increase that baseline, we increase something else, then we increase something else, and then we increase something else. Mm-hmm. And over time, the theory is we will eventually raise this minimum baseline of physical performance or human potential through all of these metrics. So, hard.
No, actually, yeah, that's why I can tell you're very passionate about the topic too.
Oh man, yeah, that's for sure.
Okay, that was my introduction of Geoffrey Harpster, who has worked in the field for several years, and then provided insight into the H2F. So with that being said, Geoffrey, I'm gonna go ahead where is it at? Actually, you see this link up here. My mouse itself, there it goes. I'm in the screen.
Really appreciate it, man, and it's good conversation as always.
Yeah. I want to thank you for your time again, and then I'll connect with you as well through LinkedIn, some other social media outlets that we can stay connected. And I appreciate everything you've done, and thank you for helping me with this project, brother. All right, thanks a lot, man.
All right, have a good one.
You too.